How can you make powerful e-learning scenarios that are memorable and have a business impact? If you're an e-learning developer or an interactive video designer, you need to know which instructional design techniques to leverage so you can be the most effective. I'm not talking about ADDIE or waterfall methods here. I mean, you can use those methods if you want, but in today's rapidly changing business environment, you might want to consider other instructional design techniques, especially when it comes to scenario-based learning. In today's video, I'll share 3 tips that will help you create powerful e-learning scenarios. And be sure to watch through to the end when I'll give you a bonus tip that will save you a ton of time on your projects. Hi there, it's Kimberly Go, bringing you tips and tools to take interactive video to the next level. Let's dive right in. Tip number 1 is to use action mapping. Action mapping is a methodology developed by Kathy Moore. I think of it as a new instructional design technique for achieving real business impact in the workplace. With action mapping, you don't do traditional needs analysis. Instead, you interview your SMEs or subject matter experts to identify the business goals they want to achieve. You find out what actions people need to do to achieve that goal and why they aren't doing it. Notice it's about what people need to do, not what they need to know. This helps you avoid creating e-learning that's essentially an information dump. You also discover the real causes of the problems, whether they're caused by the workplace environment, a knowledge gap, a skills gap, or a motivation problem. Then you design a solution that's laser focused on activities that move the business forward. This approach can really transform your career. When you use action mapping, you're less like an order taker and more like a performance consultant. Action mapping has taken the L&D industry by storm. There's so many thought leaders out there right now talking about action mapping, and I know it's completely transformed the way that I work on my client projects. Kathy Moore explains how to use action mapping in her excellent book, Map It. If you haven't read it yet, I highly recommend reading this book. If you happen to be new to instructional design, this book will help you avoid common mistakes. And if you're an experienced instructional designer, you'll discover new ways to have a greater impact. I'll include a link to Map It in the description below. Tip number 2 is to use storytelling techniques. As an instructional designer, you occasionally might be asked to create individual scenario questions that seem a bit disjointed. Think back to those word problems you encountered during high school math class. Do you even remember what they were about? Do you recall who the characters were or what happened to them? Did those word problems engage your emotions in any way? Now, compare that experience to how you think of your favorite movie or story. There's a reason you remember stories, and it has to do with the common story structure called the hero's journey. The hero's journey shows up frequently in books, movies, and popular shows. I'll go into more details in a future video, but for now, just think of it as the protagonist's journey from an ordinary life to a happy ending as they grow through challenges they face along the way. For instance, say that you're asked to create a series of call center training questions. You need to describe a customer's problem and then present several choices for the call servant agent's response. Instead of just presenting each question as a separate word problem, try surrounding it with a story narrative. You could introduce the agent as the protagonist, then give her a little bit of backstory so we sympathize with her and care about her as the hero. Then, when she's talking with each customer, it feels like her decisions matter. And if she makes a mistake, you see the bad consequence play out and it draws you deeper into the story. It awakens our feelings of empathy, and that's what keeps us engaged. Maybe she can revisit those decisions and learn from her mistakes. And as she makes better choices, we watch the good consequences play out and we cheer her on. And when she finally makes it to that happy ending, we feel happy for her. Plus, we've learned alongside her during her hero's journey. We're more likely to remember what we learned if we felt emotionally engaged when we learned it. That's the power of storytelling. It makes learning stick because it awakens empathy inside the human heart and boosts audience engagement to the next level. In just a moment, I'll give you tip number 3. But first, could you do me a big favor and hit that like button? I'm trying to get the word out about the power of e-learning scenarios, and when you like or comment on this video, YouTube will share the video with even more people. Okay, tip number 3 is to use action mapping and storytelling together in your e-learning scenarios. Both action mapping and storytelling are good instructional design tools when used independently of each other. You can use action mapping techniques without any kind of hero's journey and still create impactful activities. Or you could use storytelling combined with traditional ADDIE methodology and come up with some really solid e-learning courses. But if your goal is to create the most powerful e-learning scenarios possible, it's best to use action mapping and storytelling together. Action mapping is like the bones of your e-learning scenario. In the human body, it's the bones that give us structure. It's what helps us to stand upright. Without our bones, we'd all just be formless blobs. In the same way, action mapping gives your e-learning scenario structure. Action mapping ties the scenario directly to the key business goals and activities that move the business forward. Story is like the body that surrounds the bones. It's the hair, the eyes, the body form, and the facial features. It's what people see when they see you, how they remember you, and how they interact with you. Story is the glue that holds the e-learning scenario together. When you begin telling someone a story, they immediately drop their guard. Instead of gearing up for a big informational lecture, they relax into listening mode. And if you incorporate elements from the hero's journey, you'll engage their hearts as well as their minds. Long after your e-learning scenario is over, they'll still remember it at a deep intuitive level because the story engaged their emotions. The bottom line is this: if you build an e-learning story that doesn't achieve any business goals, at best you have entertainment and at worst you have irrelevant training. And if your e-learning is just a series of disjointed word problems, you might have just transported your audience back to their high school math class. So, use action mapping and storytelling together to create the most powerful e-learning scenarios, the kind with high emotional engagement and high business impact. Now, let's talk about that bonus tip. Use structure to manage scope. If you've been doing e-learning or instructional design for any amount of time, you know all about the dangers of scope creep. Let's say you're building a branching scenario with 3 choices per decision and just 3 levels of decisions. You'd have to create 27 alternate endings, and many of those endings might never even be seen by your audience. Now, imagine what it would be like to review this branching scenario with your SME. First, you have to explain to the SME how to read and give you feedback on the branching map. And then, if they make any changes, it causes a ripple effect that cascades through all the connected branches. This kind of structure can create a scope creep nightmare that becomes a real drain on your time and productivity. There might be a few situations that require this level of complexity, but most business problems can be solved with a much simpler structure. If you know how to use tools like bottlenecks and variables, you can drastically decrease scope and yet still deliver a powerful learning experience. Bottlenecks are events that draw many alternate scenes back into one single event. For instance, by strategically adding one bottleneck event, you could reduce the number of alternate endings from 27 to 9. Variables are another way to simplify project scope. If you're using a tool like Articulate Storyline or Adobe Captivate, you can use variables to track decisions that people make as they go through your scenario. Then at the end, you can jump to the appropriate alternate ending based on the value of those variables. I'll go into more detail about bottlenecks and variables in a future video, but for now, just know that it's an important thing to choose the right structure in order to manage project scope. Okay, I'm just about to release a brand new video series called Instructional Design Tips. This series will cover topics like the power of story, the pros and cons of branching scenarios, and how to use Articulate 360. Be sure to subscribe if you'd like to see those videos as soon as they're uploaded. I'll include a link to this new video series here as soon as the videos become available. Click the screen right now to watch this next video coming right up.